I'm Heather, 32, and I never imagined my wedding would be in a nursing home. But when my grandmother Eleanor couldn't travel, my fiancé Blake and I changed our plans without hesitation. My mother Margaret's reaction? That's too miserable to tell anyone. My sister Rachel laughed, post that, and people will call it a poverty wedding. Despite their mockery, it became the most beautiful day, especially when Grandma whispered, "I'm glad I lived to see this." The next morning, my phone rang at 6 a.m. They needed to talk urgently. If you're enjoying this story, please like and subscribe, and let me know where you're watching from. My grandmother Eleanor wasn't just my grandmother. She was my rock, my safe place, my second mother. After my parents divorced when I was 7, I spent weekends and many weekdays at her cozy 2-bedroom house, while my mother found herself through a series of relationships and career experiments. Those nights at Grandma's, with her homemade bread and endless patience helping with homework, became the stable foundation I needed. By the time I reached college, Grandma Eleanor had become more than family. She was my best friend. We called each other every Sunday without fail, even during my semester abroad in Spain. She never learned to text, but she mastered email in her 80s just to stay connected. When I graduated with my nursing degree, she was front row center, beaming with more pride than anyone. Everything changed last year when Grandma fell in her kitchen. At 92, her recovery wasn't simple. A broken hip led to complications, and after 2 months in hospital, her doctors recommended full-time care. The decision to move her to Riverside Gardens nursing home was heartbreaking, but necessary. I visited 3 times a week, watching as she gradually adapted, but also weakened. Her mind remained sharp as ever, but her body was finally showing its age. During this difficult transition, Blake was my constant support. We'd met 4 years earlier at a hospital fundraiser. He worked in hospital administration, while I was a pediatric nurse on the same campus. Our relationship had grown from friendly coffee breaks to a deep partnership that felt effortless. Blake understood family loyalty without explanation. Having lost his father young, he valued every moment with his remaining family. When he proposed on a snowy December evening in the park where we had our first date, saying yes was the easiest decision of my life. We immediately dove into planning a September wedding, touring traditional venues and discussing guest lists. Blake and I both envisioned something intimate but special, around 60 guests, outdoors if weather permitted, with personal touches rather than extravagance. 2 months into planning, during a routine visit to Grandma, reality hit me hard. She had developed pneumonia and, although recovering, looked frailier than ever. When she asked about wedding plans and venues, her eyes sparkled with interest, but when I mentioned the locations, all at least 40 minutes from Riverside Gardens, something in her expression shifted. "Those all sound lovely, dear," she said, patting my hand. "You must take plenty of pictures to show me after." The realization struck me like physical pain. Grandma was assuming she wouldn't attend. The woman who had essentially raised me, who had shaped who I was, didn't expect to be at my wedding. I left her room that day with a heavy heart and called Blake from the parking lot, barely holding back tears. "What if we got married at Riverside Gardens?" I blurted out before even saying hello. "In the garden area or that big community room?" So Grandma could be there. Blake didn't hesitate. "If that's what would make you happy, then that's what we'll do. Your grandmother being there matters more than any fancy venue." That evening, we sat at our kitchen table reimagining our entire wedding. The nursing home had a large community room that opened to a garden patio. The director, Sharon, was a former patient of mine who I knew would be accommodating. We could decorate creatively, limit guest count if needed, and work around the residents' schedules. It felt right, unusual, yes, but meaningful in a way that validated my relationship with the woman who had given me so much. The next morning, I called my mother Margaret to share our change of plans, expecting at least basic support. My mother and I had a complicated relationship, but she had seemed genuinely happy about my engagement. I thought she would understand the importance of including Grandma, her own mother, in such a significant event. I couldn't have been more wrong. A nursing home wedding? My mother's voice rose an octave through the phone. Heather, you can't be serious. That's the most depressing thing I've ever heard. No one wants to celebrate surrounded by medical equipment and old people waiting to die. Her words felt like a slap. Mom, it's not about the venue. It's about including Grandma. She can't travel, and I need her there. There are other options, she insisted. Hire a medical transport. Get her a private nurse for the day. Your sister's friend just got married at Lakeside Manor. It was gorgeous. I already told my friends you'd probably choose something similar. The conversation spiraled from there. Mother suggested I was being overly dramatic about Grandma's condition and that I should consider everyone else's experience, too. When I stood firm, she sighed dramatically and insisted we discuss it further in person. 2 days later, I found myself at an upscale cafe downtown, facing both my mother and my sister Rachel across the table. At 27, Rachel had built a substantial social media following documenting her glamorous marketing career and equally glamorous social life. She was obsessed with appearances and had inherited our mother's judgment without the occasional warmth that balanced it. Mom told me about your idea, Rachel said, stirring her latte without making eye contact. I thought she was joking. It's not a joke. Blake and I are having our wedding at Riverside Gardens so Grandma can be there. We've already talked to the director. Mother leaned forward, diamond bracelet clinking against her water glass. Honey, I understand you're close to your grandmother, but this is your wedding. The photographs will be forever. Do you really want your special day associated with end of life? Grandma isn't dead, Mom. She's very much alive, and she deserves to be included. Rachel rolled her eyes. Can you imagine the social media posts? Come celebrate our special day between medication rounds and bingo. Sorry, but it sounds like a poverty wedding. People will think you couldn't afford a real venue. I don't care what people think, I replied, though her words stung more than I wanted to admit. Mother touched my hand in that patronizing way she'd perfected. Weddings aren't just about the couple, dear. They're social statements. Family statements. What you're suggesting reflects on all of us. How exactly does it reflect on you if Blake and I choose to prioritize family over appearances? Rachel snorted. It suggests we're the kind of people who can't do better. My followers expect a certain aesthetic. I can't post pictures from a nursing home wedding. Then don't post them, I snapped. This isn't about your social media brand. Mother's expression hardened. Heather, I'm telling you now. If you go through with this nursing home plan, I may not attend. I cannot celebrate my daughter starting her marriage in such a depressing environment. I stared at her, searching for any sign she was bluffing. Finding none, I turned to Rachel. And you? Will you skip your sister's wedding because the venue isn't Instagram-worthy? Rachel shrugged. I just think you're making a huge mistake. Plus, no offense, but what if one of the residents dies during your wedding? Talk about bad omens. I gathered my purse and stood up, fighting back tears. Grandma raised me when you were too busy, Mom. She never missed a school play or a parent-teacher conference. She deserves to see me get married, and I'm not excluding her because you're worried about appearances. I left without waiting for a response, crying in my car for 20 minutes before I could drive home. When Blake returned from work, I collapsed into his arms, recounting the awful lunch. His jaw tightened as I spoke, but he remained calm. They don't get to decide this, he said firmly. It's our wedding. If they choose not to come because they're embarrassed by your love for your grandmother, that's their loss. That night, doubts crept in despite Blake's reassurance. I loved my mother and sister despite our differences. The thought of them missing my wedding created a hollow feeling in my chest. And what if they were right? What if the nursing home setting was too depressing? What if guests felt uncomfortable? Mother called the next evening, her voice softer, but her message unchanged. I've been thinking about alternative solutions, she began without greeting. What about having two ceremonies? A small, private one for your grandmother at Riverside, and then the real wedding at a proper venue for everyone else. That's not happening, Mom. I'm not having a real wedding and a fake one. There's one wedding, and it's where Grandma can attend. You're being stubborn, she sighed. You always were difficult when you set your mind on something. Your sister thinks you're doing this to punish me somehow. Punish you? For what? For not being the perfect mother you wanted. For working instead of baking cookies. For letting you spend so much time with your grandmother. I felt a familiar distance opening between us, the same emotional chasm that had defined our relationship for decades. This isn't about you, Mom. It never was. After hanging up, I realized how isolated I felt. The two women who should have been most involved in my wedding planning were actively fighting against my decisions. I hadn't even told Grandma about the venue change yet, wanting to surprise her with the news once arrangements were confirmed. The weight of keeping the family conflict from her felt like another burden. The first meeting with Sharon, the nursing home administrator, lifted my spirits considerably. Far from finding our request strange, she seemed genuinely touched. In 15 years working in elder care, I've never had this request, she told us, walking through the community room. But I think it's wonderful. Eleanor is beloved here, and this would mean so much to her and actually to many of our residents. The community room was larger than I remembered, about 900 square feet with large windows overlooking the garden. Basic but clean, it had neutral walls that could work with any decoration scheme. The connected patio garden, though small, featured well-maintained rose bushes and a lovely pergola. We could hold the ceremony in the garden if weather permits, Sharon suggested. The reception could be inside. We'd need to work around meal schedules, but a Saturday afternoon between 2 and 6 p.m. would cause minimal disruption. She introduced us to Tomas, the maintenance supervisor, who immediately offered to build a simple arch for the ceremony. My daughter got married under something similar. It would be my pleasure. Their enthusiasm was contagious. For the first time since proposing the nursing home wedding, I felt genuinely excited rather than defensive. Blake squeezed my hand as we walked to the car afterward. See? This could be really special, he said. And did you see how happy Sharon looked? I think the staff are going to help make this amazing. Finding vendors willing to work with our unusual venue proved challenging, but not impossible. 2 caterers declined politely, citing space limitations. The third, a family-owned business run by a woman whose father had recently moved to assisted living, understood our motivation immediately. We'll create a menu that works for both your guests and any residents who join, she promised. Nothing too complicated given the kitchen setup, but elegant and delicious. Our photographer, a former classmate of Blake's, was similarly supportive. Unique venues make for unique photos, he said. I love the storytelling aspect of this. It's about why you're there, not just how it looks. While my mother and sister maintained their opposition through passive-aggressive texts and occasional pointed phone calls, Blake's family stepped up beautifully. His mother, Diane, a retired interior designer, volunteered to help with decorations. We'll transform that space, she promised during a planning dinner. Simple, elegant touches that respect the setting but create a wedding atmosphere. I'm thinking fabric draping, strategic lighting, and lots of fresh flowers. Blake's brother offered to create a wedding website and custom playlists. His aunt, a hobby baker, volunteered to make our cake. Each offer of help reinforced that we were making the right decision, despite my family's disapproval. Meanwhile, Rachel had apparently shared our plans with her social circle. I discovered this when a mutual friend awkwardly mentioned seeing Rachel's Instagram story, asking for advice about a difficult wedding situation. Though she hadn't named me directly, the details made it obvious who she was discussing. Apparently her followers suggested staging nice photos elsewhere for social media, my friend admitted uncomfortably. I thought you should know. The knowledge that my sister was essentially mocking my wedding plans online hurt deeply, but also strengthened my resolve. This wasn't about appearances or impressing others. It was about including the woman who had shaped my life in one of my most important moments. My anxiety about judgment from others diminished as friends like Caitlin, my maid of honor, expressed genuine support. "It's the most thoughtful wedding decision I've ever heard," she said while helping me address invitations. "Anyone who doesn't understand that doesn't understand you." Throughout all this, I still hadn't told Grandma about our plans. I wanted to wait until arrangements were more concrete before surprising her. During our regular visits, she occasionally asked about venues, and I would vaguely mention exploring options. The deception felt uncomfortable, but I wanted the reveal to be special. The tension with my mother came to a head when Blake and I encountered her unexpectedly at a restaurant. She was dining with friends, but came to our table before leaving. "Have you reconsidered your unusual venue choice?" she asked with a tight smile. Before I could respond, Blake spoke up. "Actually, Margaret, we're more excited about it than ever. The staff at Riverside have been incredibly accommodating, and we're looking forward to having Eleanor be part of our special day." Mother's smile faltered. "I see. Well, I hope you understand if I find it difficult to share your enthusiasm." After she left, I reached for Blake's hand. "Thank you for that." He shrugged. "I'm not letting anyone make you feel bad about something this important." One tradition I had always imagined sharing with my mother was wedding dress shopping. When it became clear she wouldn't participate willingly, I hesitantly asked Blake's mother, Diane, instead. "I'd be honored," she said, sounding genuinely moved. "Truly, Heather." The day we spent visiting bridal shops became one of my favorite wedding planning memories. Diane was supportive without being pushy, honest without being critical. When I found the dress, a simple A-line with vintage lace that somehow looked perfectly bridal without being overly formal, Diane teared up. "You look beautiful," she said. "Eleanor will be so proud." Our first visit to finalize arrangements at Riverside Gardens included a walkthrough with the small event team we'd assembled. As we discussed setup details in the community room, several residents watched curiously. One woman in a wheelchair approached us. "Are you the ones getting married here?" she asked. When I nodded, she beamed. "How wonderful. We never get weddings. Just, the other thing." Word spread quickly among the residents, and before we left that day, several had approached to express their excitement. One gentleman told us he hadn't attended a wedding since his grandson's 10 years earlier. Another asked if we would mind if residents watched the ceremony from the sidelines. Their enthusiasm was unexpected and touching. What had begun as a compromise to include my grandmother was evolving into something that would bring joy to many people often forgotten by the outside world. As we drove home, I felt a certainty that transcended my mother's disapproval or my sister's mockery. We were doing something meaningful. A month before the wedding, my mother launched what felt like her final campaign to change our minds. She invited us to a family dinner at her house, which turned out to include Rachel and her boyfriend Travis, but conspicuously not Grandma Eleanor. The evening started civilly enough with surface-level conversations about work and weather. Then, as dessert was served, Mother placed her hands on the table and took a deep breath. "Heather, Blake, I've respected your unique wedding plans until now," she began, ignoring my raised eyebrows at the word respected. "But as your mother, I have to make one final appeal. This nursing home wedding isn't just unconventional, it's potentially humiliating for our family." Blake tensed beside me as Mother continued. "I've spoken with Reverend Collins from my church. He's willing to perform a lovely ceremony in the chapel on short notice. I'll cover any deposits you might lose." "Mom, we're not changing venues. We've been over this repeatedly." Rachel pulled out her phone. "Before you get all defensive again, you should see this." She scrolled through her feed and turned the screen toward me. "Look what happened when some influencer had a wedding at her grandfather's assisted living facility." The comments she showed me were brutal. "Depressing AF, nothing says romance like the smell of adult diapers. Budget wedding disguised as being thoughtful." This is what you're setting yourself up for, Rachel insisted. People are mean. They'll mock your special day. I don't care what random internet strangers think, I replied, though the comments stung. Well, I care what people think about our family, Mother snapped. You've always done this, made dramatic decisions for attention without considering how it affects the rest of us. Attention? You think I want attention? You certainly wanted your grandmother's attention growing up. Following her around like a lost puppy because you couldn't handle that I had a life beyond motherhood. The conversation was veering into dangerous territory, decades-old resentments bubbling to the surface. Blake tried to intervene, but Mother was on a roll. You were always doing embarrassing things for reaction, like that time you performed that inappropriate song at the school talent show, or when you wore that ridiculous outfit to Cousin Melissa's wedding. I was 11 at that talent show. And that ridiculous outfit was the only formal dress I owned because you forgot to take me shopping. Rachel jumped in. This isn't just about Mom. Do you know how this reflects on me? I work in image consulting, Heather. How does it look when my sister has her wedding at a nursing home? I didn't realize my marriage was supposed to enhance your professional brand. I shot back. It's not just about image, Mother insisted, though her tone suggested otherwise. I'm worried this is another example of your unhealthy attachment to your grandmother. You've always acted like she hung the moon and I was just some inconvenience in your life. Because she was there. She was consistent. She showed up. She didn't disappear for days with whatever boyfriend was exciting that month. The moment the words left my mouth, I knew I'd crossed a line we normally danced around. Mother's face flushed red. I worked myself to the bone as a single mother while my own mother undermined me at every turn, making you prefer her company to mine. And now you're turning your wedding, an event that should be about your future, into another grand gesture about your relationship with her. Tears burned in my eyes. This isn't a grand gesture. It's about wanting the woman who raised me to see me get married. I raised you, Mother hissed. I paid the bills. I kept a roof over your head. And Grandma did everything else, I replied, voice breaking. She deserves to be there, and if you can't understand that, then maybe you shouldn't come. Mother stood abruptly. Perhaps I won't. Come, Rachel. I think this dinner is over. Rachel gathered her purse, shooting me a disappointed look. You know she'll die soon anyway, she said quietly. Is all this drama really worth it for someone who won't remember or probably even understand what's happening? Blake half rose from his chair, but I put a hand on his arm. Don't, I whispered. Let's just go. The drive home passed in stunned silence. Once inside our apartment, I collapsed on the couch, shaking with sobs. Blake held me, not offering empty reassurances, just steady presence. I don't understand why they can't see what this means to me, I finally whispered. I think they do, Blake replied carefully. But they're so focused on what they want, appearances, control, whatever it is, that they can't put your needs first. The next day, I visited Grandma, still raw from the previous night's confrontation. She noticed immediately. You look troubled, sweetheart, she said, patting the space beside her on the small sofa in her room. I couldn't tell her the real reason, so I deflected with a half-truth. Just wedding stress. Trying to make everything perfect. She chuckled softly. Perfect is overrated. You know, your grandfather and I got married during a blizzard. Half the guests couldn't make it, the cake got dropped, and the heat went out in the reception hall. And it was still the happiest day of my life until you were born. She took my hand in her papery one. Marriage isn't about the wedding, Heather. It's about choosing someone who stands beside you when life gets messy. Blake is that person for you. I've seen it. Everything else is just details. Her wisdom, offered without knowing the specific conflict, touched me deeply. Yet I still found myself wondering if I should compromise. Find some middle ground that would bring peace to the family without excluding Grandma. That evening, I broached the subject with Blake. What if we did have a small ceremony here and then something elsewhere? Maybe Mom is right that I'm being stubborn. Blake considered this carefully. If you genuinely want to change plans, we can discuss it. But if you're only considering it to appease your mother and sister, I think you'll regret it. He took my hands. What does your heart tell you is right? The answer came without hesitation. Having one wedding where Grandma can be fully included. Not as an afterthought, but as the honored guest she deserves to be. Then that's what we'll do, he said simply. With or without your mother and sister's approval. The next day, Mother called to inform me that she and Rachel had thought it over and decided they couldn't attend a nursing home wedding. It's simply too painful, she explained, as if declining a root canal rather than her daughter's marriage. The final week of preparations proceeded without their help or input. Friends and Blake's family stepped up magnificently, handling last-minute details and offering emotional support. Caitlin organized a beautiful bridal shower. Blake's mother helped with final fittings and decor decisions. Their kindness highlighted what real family support looked like, not controlling or judgmental, but loving and accepting. 3 days before the wedding, I finally told Grandma about our venue choice. Her reaction was worth every difficult moment leading up to it. Here? You're getting married here. Her eyes filled with tears. Because of me? For you, I corrected. Because I can't imagine this day without you front and center. She pulled me close, her thin arms surprisingly strong. In all my years, she whispered, I don't think anyone has ever given me such a meaningful gift. The morning of the wedding, I woke to an unexpected text from my mother. We will attend. Please save 2 seats. Arriving at 1:30. No apology, no explanation, just a terse confirmation. I showed Blake as he brought me coffee in bed. Are you okay with this? He asked cautiously. I considered the question. Yes, I finally decided. Despite everything, I want them there. Just as long as they behave. Arriving at Riverside Gardens 3 hours before the ceremony, I was stunned by the transformation. The community room had been reimagined with sheer fabric draping from the ceiling, creating a tent-like effect that softened the institutional lighting. Round tables were dressed in simple white cloths with centerpieces of wildflowers in vintage blue mason jars, Grandma's favorite. String lights twinkled along the perimeter, and a small wooden dance floor had been installed in one corner. The garden was even more magical. Tomas had indeed built a beautiful arch, now covered with greenery and white roses. White folding chairs formed a semicircle facing the arch, with a simple aisle created by white rose petals. The existing pergola had been decorated with more flowers and fabric, creating a perfect backdrop for photos. Sharon met me at the entrance, beaming. The residents have been buzzing about this all week. Many of them are getting their hair done specially. True to her word, as residents began gathering in the community room, I noticed many were dressed in their finest clothes. One woman proudly told me she was wearing the dress she'd worn to her daughter's wedding 15 years earlier. A gentleman showed off his polished shoes and newly trimmed mustache. Blake's mother Diane had arranged for a small team of volunteer hairstylists and makeup artists to help both the bridal party and any residents who wanted to participate. The nursing home had taken on a festive atmosphere unlike anything I'd seen there before. At 1 o'clock, Caitlin helped me into my dress in Grandma's room. When I emerged, Grandma pressed her hands to her mouth. Oh, my darling girl, she whispered. You look exactly like I always imagined. Before I could respond, there was a knock at the door. My mother and Rachel stood in the hallway, both impeccably dressed and wearing identical strained expressions. You're here, I said unnecessarily. Mother nodded stiffly. You look beautiful, she offered, sounding almost surprised. Rachel's eyes darted around the room, taking in the modest surroundings. The dress is gorgeous, she acknowledged. The awkwardness was palpable, but before it could overwhelm us, Blake's mother appeared. Heather, the photographer, wants some pre-ceremony shots in the garden before guests arrive. Oh, hello, she added, noticing my mother and sister. I'm Diane, Blake's mom. So glad you could make it. Her warm, genuine tone highlighted the artifice in my family's behavior. Mother introduced herself with her society smile, the one reserved for people she wanted to impress. "The venue looks lovely," she said, and I could hear the surprise in her voice. "Very creative." I excused myself for photos, leaving them to find their seats. In the garden, I had a moment alone with Blake before the ceremony. He looked handsome in his navy suit, his eyes lighting up when he saw me. "They came," I told him. "Good," he said simply. "Now forget about them. This day isn't about their approval." The ceremony began at 2 o'clock under perfect blue skies. Blake and I had decided against a traditional procession. Instead, we entered from opposite sides of the garden, meeting at the arch where our officiant waited. Grandma had been given a special seat in the front row, a small cushioned armchair rather than the folding chairs everyone else used. As we exchanged vows, I was aware of the unique setting, the nursing home visible beyond the garden, some residents watching from wheelchairs positioned along the perimeter, the mix of family, friends, and elderly spectators. Yet none of it felt strange or compromised. If anything, it felt more authentic than any ballroom or banquet hall could have. "Marriage," our officiant said, "is about creating family, not just between two people, but across generations." Today, we witness not only the union of Heather and Blake, but the honoring of family bonds that transcend time and circumstance. I sneaked a glance at my mother during these words. She sat rigidly beside Rachel, her expression unreadable. Beyond them, I could see Blake's family, emotional and engaged. And beside me, Grandma Eleanor watched with tears streaming unchecked down her lined face. After we were pronounced husband and wife and shared our first kiss as a married couple, we turned to face our guests. The applause that erupted from family, friends, staff, and residents alike felt like a collective affirmation of our choice. As we moved toward the community room for the reception, I knelt briefly beside Grandma's chair. "Thank you for being here," I told her, taking her hand. She squeezed my fingers and leaned close. "I'm glad I lived to see this," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "This is the happiest day since your grandfather and I got married 68 years ago." The reception unfolded with a warmth I hadn't dared to hope for. The caterers had created a beautiful buffet that worked perfectly for the space. Our small cake, displayed on Grandma's antique cake stand, looked both elegant and meaningful. The first dance, to the same song my grandparents had danced to at their wedding, felt like a bridge across generations. What surprised me most was how the nursing home residents enhanced rather than detracted from the celebration. Several shared marriage advice when invited by our DJ, offering gems like "never go to bed angry" and "learn to laugh at yourself." One couple, married for 59 years, demonstrated their wedding dance to delighted applause. Around the room, I noticed guests genuinely engaging with residents, listening to their stories, helping with plates of food, dancing to slower numbers. The artificial barriers between wedding guests and nursing home residents dissolved as the afternoon progressed. Midway through the reception, I overheard my mother speaking to one of her friends who had attended. "It's actually lovely," she admitted quietly. "Different, but there's something very genuine about it." "And did you see Eleanor's face during the ceremony?" "Worth everything." The acknowledgement, not intended for my ears, felt more meaningful than any direct apology could have been. Our photographer moved through the space, capturing everything. Not just traditional wedding moments, but the unique interactions between generations. Later, he showed me a shot of 3 elderly women watching Blake and me dance, their expressions a mixture of nostalgia and joy. "This is gold," he said. "You can't manufacture these kinds of genuine emotions." As the reception wound down, my mother approached me. For a moment, we stood awkwardly, years of miscommunication and hurt stretching between us. "You proved me wrong," she finally said. This wasn't depressing or embarrassing. It was beautiful in its way. It wasn't exactly an apology, but from my mother, it was significant. "Thank you for coming," I replied. "It meant a lot to have you here." She nodded, emotion briefly crossing her face before she composed herself. Your grandmother looks happier than I've seen her in years." As guests began departing, many stopped to thank us not just for the invitation, but for the experience. "Most meaningful wedding I've ever attended" became a common refrain. Several mentioned they'd been apprehensive about the nursing home setting but found it refreshing and moving. The day ended with a quiet moment in Grandma's room where Blake and I stopped to say goodnight before leaving for our hotel. She was tired but radiant. "I have something for you," she said, handing me a small, worn velvet box. Inside was her mother's gold locket. I was saving it for today. As Blake and I drove away, exhausted but content, I felt a sense of vindication and peace. We had stayed true to what mattered most to us, despite pressure and criticism. The result hadn't been a compromise or a consolation prize. It had been exactly right. The morning after the wedding, still basking in newlywed happiness at our hotel, I selected a few favorite photos the photographer had sent overnight and posted them to my modest social media accounts. My caption was simple: "Yesterday we celebrated our marriage at Riverside Gardens Nursing Home, so my incredible grandmother Eleanor could be fully part of our day." It became the most meaningful experience we could have imagined. #best day ever. Blake brought me coffee in bed as I scrolled through immediate reactions, friends and colleagues responding with heart emojis and congratulations. Nothing unusual or particularly viral-worthy. That changed dramatically 3 days later when our photographer published a blog post featuring our wedding. Titled "Love Across Generations," it included dozens of stunning images: Grandma watching the ceremony with tears in her eyes, Blake and me exchanging vows under the handmade arch, residents and guests mingling joyfully at the reception, and candid moments capturing the unique atmosphere of the day. When Heather and Blake told me they were holding their wedding at Riverside Gardens Nursing Home so Heather's 92-year-old grandmother could attend, I knew this would be special, the photographer wrote. What I didn't expect was how profoundly moving it would be to witness a celebration that honored family bonds above convention and meaningful connection above appearances. In 15 years of wedding photography, I've never documented a more authentic expression of love. His post was picked up by a popular wedding blog, then shared by a major women's magazine's social media account. By the end of the week, our wedding photos had spread far beyond our social circles, accompanied by overwhelmingly positive comments about relationship goals and wedding priorities done right. The nursing home began receiving calls from people touched by the story, some offering donations for resident activities. A local florist volunteered to provide monthly arrangements for the common areas. 3 different couples contacted Sharon about possibly holding their own ceremonies there so elderly relatives could attend. I was responding to a journalist's interview request when our doorbell rang insistently at 7:30 a.m., 1 week after the wedding. Through the peephole, I could see my mother and sister standing on our doorstep, both looking uncharacteristically disheveled. "We need to talk to you right now," Mother said the moment I opened the door. "It's an emergency." They bustled into our living room, Rachel clutching her phone like a lifeline. "Have you seen what's happening online?" she demanded without preamble. "Our wedding photos are getting some attention," I acknowledged cautiously. "People seem to like them." "Some attention?" Rachel laughed hysterically. "They've gone completely viral. That photographer's blog has over 1 million shares. You're trending on multiple platforms." Mother sank onto our couch. "Everyone is talking about it. My phone hasn't stopped with people asking if that was really my daughter's wedding." "Is that a problem?" Blake asked, entering from the kitchen. "It depends," Rachel said tersely. "The problem is that some of my followers remembered me mocking the idea months ago. Someone found my old posts questioning why anyone would have a depressing nursing home wedding, and now I'm getting absolutely roasted online for being shallow and unsupportive. And several of my friends were at the wedding," Mother added. "They saw how beautiful it turned out, and now they're wondering why I wasn't more involved in the planning, why I'm barely in any photos." The irony wasn't lost on me. "So you're here because you're worried about how you look in relation to our wedding going viral in a positive way?" We're here, Mother said carefully, to ask if you would consider adjusting the narrative. Adjusting the narrative, I repeated flatly. Rachel nodded eagerly. Just a small edit to your captions and comments. Maybe mention how supportive the whole family was of the nursing home idea from the beginning. Or at least don't confirm it if anyone asks about any resistance. You want me to lie and say you supported our venue choice? After you both mocked it for months and threatened not to attend, Mother had the grace to look somewhat ashamed. Not lie, exactly. Just focus on the positive aspects of family togetherness. The audacity was breathtaking. I looked at Blake, who raised his eyebrows in a "your call" expression. Let me get this straight, I said slowly. You ridiculed our wedding plans, made me feel terrible about a choice that was incredibly meaningful to me, nearly missed the wedding entirely, and now that it's getting positive attention, you want to be portrayed as supportive? You don't understand how damaging this could be, Rachel insisted. I work in image consulting. How does it look when I'm on record disparaging a wedding concept that everyone is now calling beautiful and meaningful? Maybe, Blake suggested gently, this is an opportunity for reflection rather than image management. Mother shot him an irritated look before turning back to me. Heather, surely you can understand our position. We may have been hasty in our initial reactions, but we did come to the wedding. We did support you in the end. I felt a complex mix of emotions, anger at their self-centeredness, vindication that our choice had been validated so publicly, and beneath it all, a lingering desire for genuine family healing. I'm not going to lie for you, I said finally. I won't pretend you were supportive when you weren't. They both began to protest, but I held up my hand. However, I continued, I also won't publicly discuss any family conflict. This isn't about exposing your behavior or making you look bad. It's about celebrating a day that was meaningful to us and to Grandma. Mother considered this. And if someone directly asks about family support, I'll say that in the end, everyone who mattered was there, and that's what counts, I replied, not missing her slight flinch at the implication. Rachel looked less satisfied. That doesn't really solve my problem with looking hypocritical online. Maybe you could post something honest, Blake suggested, about how you initially had reservations but were moved by the actual day. People respect growth and honesty. Vulnerability is not really Rachel's brand, I noted dryly. To my surprise, Rachel didn't immediately dismiss the idea. I could frame it as a learning moment, I suppose. What my sister taught me about authentic celebrations or something. The conversation shifted then, becoming something I hadn't expected, an actual dialogue about perception versus reality, about social media facades versus genuine connections. For perhaps the first time, my mother and sister seemed to be seeing their behavior from an outside perspective. I think I was jealous, Rachel admitted suddenly. Not just about the wedding attention, but about your relationship with Grandma. She's always been different with you than with me. Because you never spent time with her, I pointed out. You were always so focused on friends and activities and being like Mom. I wanted to be sophisticated, she said quietly. Grandma seemed so old-fashioned. But seeing her at the wedding, hearing what people were saying about her wisdom. I missed out on something, didn't I? Mother remained more defensive, but even she eventually acknowledged, perhaps I was too concerned with appearances. Your grandmother always criticized me for that. Said I was teaching the girls to value the wrong things. We didn't resolve years of family dynamics in one morning conversation, but something shifted. A first step toward honesty that felt more significant than any viral wedding photos. As they prepared to leave, my mother paused. The wedding really was beautiful, Heather. Different than I expected, but beautiful. Your grandmother's face when you two were pronounced married. She swallowed hard. That was a gift you gave her that no one else could have. After they left, Blake wrapped his arms around me from behind. Well, that was unexpected. The viral photos or my family's minor breakthrough? Both, he laughed. Think anything will actually change with them? I leaned back against him. I don't know. But at least we know we made the right choice, regardless. The phone rang Riverside Gardens, calling with news that a local network wanted to do a human interest story about our wedding and its impact on the nursing home. "They're saying your photos have inspired several donations to elder care organizations," Sharon explained excitedly. "And 3 other nursing homes in the state have been contacted about hosting weddings." As I hung up, I realized our simple choice to include Grandma had rippled outward in ways we never could have anticipated, not just healing family wounds, but potentially changing how people viewed nursing homes and their residents. "Not bad for a poverty wedding," Blake joked, referencing Rachel's earlier mockery. "Not bad at all," I agreed, thinking of Grandma's radiant face as we said our vows. "Worth every difficult moment leading up to it." 1 month after our wedding, Blake and I visited Riverside Gardens bearing gifts, framed wedding photos for Grandma, and several large prints for the community room. The nursing home had undergone subtle changes since our celebration: fresh paint in the common areas, new cushions on the patio furniture, flower arrangements on previously bare tables. "Your wedding started something," Sharon told us proudly. "We've received over $15,000 in community donations. But more importantly, we've had an uptick in volunteers and visitors. People saw your photos and remembered their own elderly relatives." Grandma had become something of a celebrity among the residents, happily showing off her wedding photos to anyone who expressed interest. Her health had stabilized, and her nurses reported she seemed more engaged and energetic. "Everyone asks me about my granddaughter's wedding," she said, beaming as we settled in her room for our visit. "Dr. Michaels says I'm the most popular resident now." The relationship with my mother and sister had entered a new phase, not healed completely, but evolving. Mother had visited Grandma 3 times in the past month, more than in the previous 6 months combined. Their interactions, while still sometimes strained, had a new undertone of respect. Rachel had indeed posted about her journey, from judgment to understanding regarding our wedding choice. While I suspected her motivation was largely image management, her subsequent behavior suggested some genuine reflection. She'd asked for Grandma's phone number and begun calling her weekly, awkward conversations at first, but gradually warming. 2 weeks after the wedding, Mother had suggested family therapy to address some long-standing issues. I'd been shocked by the proposal. My mother had always dismissed therapy as unnecessary drama. Blake encouraged me to accept the olive branch, and we'd attended 2 sessions so far with a family counselor. In those sessions, painful truths emerged. Mother acknowledged her resentment of Grandma's close relationship with me, rooted in her own complicated relationship with her mother. "I felt replaced," she admitted during our 2nd session. "Like I was the biological mother, but not the real one in your heart." I shared my childhood perception of being an inconvenience to her active social life, of Grandma being the only consistent adult presence I could count on. Rachel spoke of feeling overlooked, not the troubled child who needed Grandma's special attention, not the social butterfly who captured Mother's interest. "We were all playing our assigned roles," the therapist observed. "The question is whether you want to continue those patterns or create new ones." Blake adapted to my complex family with remarkable grace. "I knew I wasn't just marrying you," he joked after a particularly intense therapy session. "I was marrying your grandmother, your mother, your sister, and all the dynamics between you." But beneath the humor, he provided steady support as I navigated the shifting family terrain. Our friendship with the nursing home residents continued to flourish. What had begun as a practical wedding decision evolved into regular visits, bringing board games or desserts to share. Several residents had become genuine friends, offering life wisdom accumulated over decades. During one such visit, Grandma shared family history I'd never heard before, how her own mother had disapproved of her marriage to Grandpa, creating a rift that lasted years. She thought he wasn't ambitious enough, Grandma explained. But he was kind and steady, which matters more in the long run than ambition. The parallels to my mother's disapproval of our wedding weren't lost on either of us. History has a way of repeating, Grandma acknowledged. But it also has a way of healing if we let it. Mother's increased visits to Grandma seemed to be addressing decades of tension between them as well. I arrived once to find them looking through old photo albums, Mother laughing at images of herself as a rebellious teenager. I was determined to be different from my mother, she told me later. But in trying so hard not to be her, I missed some of the good parts she could have taught me. The local community recognized our wedding's impact in unexpected ways. The county's Elder Services Commission invited us to accept a certificate of appreciation for promoting intergenerational celebration and highlighting the importance of elder inclusion. The genuine warmth we received was touching, though Blake and I both felt somewhat undeserving of recognition for what had simply been a decision made from love. As summer turned to fall, I reflected on how a single choice to hold our wedding where Grandma could attend had catalyzed so much change. Not just in our family dynamics, but in shifting perspectives about nursing homes from places of endings to potential sites of celebration and new beginnings. People think about wedding values all wrong, Blake observed one evening as we looked through our album. They focus on appearances rather than meaning. But meaning is what you remember 50 years later. Grandma's health stabilized enough that her doctors began discussing the possibility of occasional day trips. Her first outing was to our apartment for Sunday dinner, a small gathering that included my mother and, surprisingly, Rachel. The conversation flowed more easily than I could have imagined 6 months earlier. There were still moments of tension, old patterns threatening to reassert themselves, but also genuine laughter and connection. As we helped Grandma back to the nursing home that evening, she squeezed my hand. "This is what I wanted most," she said. "Not just to see you married, but to see our family healing." That's the real wedding gift. In the months since our wedding, I've received dozens of messages from strangers who saw our photos online. Many shared similar stories of adapting celebrations to include elderly relatives. Others admitted our story had prompted them to reconnect with grandparents they'd neglected to visit. Each message reinforced that our unusual venue choice had resonated far beyond our personal circle. Looking back, I'm grateful not just for the beautiful day we had, but for the unexpected journey it prompted. A wedding truly is just one day, but the ripples from our decisions that day continue to spread outward, touching lives we never anticipated and healing wounds we'd given up on. The greatest lesson wasn't about standing up to criticism or proving others wrong, though that validation was admittedly satisfying. The real lesson was about courage to prioritize what truly matters, even when it's difficult or unconventional. About creating celebration that reflects authentic values rather than external expectations. Last week, Grandma gave me a letter she'd written to be opened on our first anniversary. "For when I might not be here," she explained pragmatically. Though I hope that day remains far in the future, her gift reminded me of life's impermanence and the importance of meaningful connections while we have them. As Blake and I build our marriage on the foundation of that special day, we carry forward not just memories of a beautiful wedding, but the wisdom Grandma whispered to me during our first dance. The most important things in life are rarely the most impressive to others. Remember that. Have you ever had to make a difficult choice between what others expected and what felt truly meaningful to you? How did you handle it? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need encouragement to follow their heart rather than outside expectations. Thank you for being part of our journey, and may your own life celebrations always reflect what matters most to you.